So what we're doing here is I have posted some questions in Denver Announce. These are all the questions that we're going to try to work through. We're going to start at the top. We're going to work our way down to the bottom. These are like mega bite-sized chunks. So like if we get through one of these in 2 minutes, the next question has nothing to do with the previous one. So drop in, drop out, doesn't matter. What we're going to do is I'm going to put one of these questions up on the board, and I want you to do your best. Write it. Not in your head. Like, it can be by hand. Probably better typing it. You need to come up with an answer for this using the best language you can. And then I'm going to do the same thing, and then we're going to compare. And you can ask any questions you want to ask. Cool. Any questions before we begin? Pretty straightforward deal. So I'm going to start with a minute. We'll see. That feels short to me. Yeah, it already feels short to me. Let's do it 2 minutes. So I'm going to put 2 minutes on the clock. Write out an answer to this question. Go. $30 seconds. All right, pencils down. Take a look at what I wrote. Take a look at what you wrote. They don't need to be identical, but probably should be in the same ballpark. Be very careful with your use of words like invoked, implicit, like these mean specific things. What questions do we have about this? The reason that this is on here is one of the easiest dummy screeners that employers will do to find out if you know anything about programming is if you can tell the difference between returning something from a method or logging something. Because they both kind of output, but in super different ways. Excellent.
So,
yeah.
You're talking about method and like the difference between method and function. And so a function returns a transformed value.
Yes.
Would you want to mention like a method is doing a procedure and returning that?
Interesting. That sounds like a new question. I like it. Let's do it next. What's the difference between a procedure, a function, and a method? And that felt a little long to me, so let's do a minute. 1 minute. Give me an answer. All right, pencils down. This is my answer. Compare it to your answer. See what's the same, see what's different. Questions about the distinction between these three things? Yeah, Mez. There are no functions that don't return something. There are functions that don't take in inputs. I'd say that's rare, but I can conceive of a function that does not take in an input. Function is from math. This is f of x, that kind of stuff. We can plot out all of the y's for some x. If we swap that out for function arguments and return values, same thing. Other questions about this? Great question. So, this is one that we have coming up in a sec. Let's talk classes and objects briefly. This was form data. If I have an object combines what two things? Nope, not JavaScript object, real object. A JavaScript object is just a hash that was misnamed. Like literally. Objects are different. What is an object? I heard it. Instance of a class. That's an object. So, what two things are stored on an object? State and behavior. Very nice. Seems like some of y'all need to brush up on your Mod 1 stuff. So, state and behavior are the two things that we keep on a class. Behavior, these are methods. State, these are properties. That took too long. So, methods, properties. By and large, what our procedures do is operate on our state. That's what makes them special. I call some procedure, which is just any repeated set of instructions. But I'm probably reading in a property, I'm probably changing a property, I'm probably outputting a property, I'm doing something like that. If the purpose of an object is to keep the state and behavior together, a method is a procedure that operates on that state. Cool. Other questions about procedure, function, and method?
So when we call them procedures,
Yes. Because procedure. Come on, baby. Because we're not like this is an academic distinction. You'll hear people use all three of these things interchangeably. Subroutine would also go in there. Subroutine and a procedure, the same thing. I was watching Silicon Valley last night, and they were like laughing about somebody's subroutine procedure. The reason that the function keyword is used is because JavaScript was designed to be a largely functional language. It was designed to be to mostly be used for functions. However, Brendan Eich made it in 10 days. He didn't not let you do procedural programming with it. And so the keyword remains to this day. Good question. What else? Anybody know why basically everything is technically a method in Ruby? Everything's an object. Even when you're not inside of something, you're actually inside of the main, the like initialize or whatever, the main method of the main class, I think it is. Or the initialize of the main class, something like that. So you're still technically in a method. Finn.
How the algorithms fit in the procedure?
Depends on what it does. If it just does a repeated set of instructions, but it's not actually taking in an input and transforming it into an output, probably a procedure. If the algorithm is taking in an array and then sorting it from lowest to highest and then returning the changed value, function. So, I see what you're saying. Who can answer that? Ben.
Basically, it's procedures or arrays that's sorting button. But what is that? That's the sorting button.
It's a repeated set of steps. So, an algorithm for sorting might be, I say that this is the lowest value, and then I see if this is lower. And if it is lower, I make that the lowest value. And I keep going through everything, and then the last thing that I have down there is the lowest value in this list. That's an algorithm. There's other ways we can do that exact same thing. So if I'm searching for the lowest value, if the list is already sorted, whatever's at the beginning of the list, that's the lowest value. That's also an algorithm. And so all of those different things require different circumstances and perform differently. And they can be wrapped in procedures, functions, or methods. Great question. Other ones about the distinction between these two things? Cool. Onward. What is the difference between a hash and an array? 1 minute. Go for it. Cool. 1 minute's up. This is my answer. Characters. Quite a few vocab words in here. What questions do you have off the bat? Because it doesn't need to be sequential. If I know the index, I can also randomly access an array. But there are different kinds of data structures that we work with. For example, who's in the stacks lesson? Anybody here? Cool. Jesse, Arena, Ben, anybody tell me what a stack is and how we access those? Exactly. I can only get the most recent thing. You can't randomly access stuff in a stack. You can randomly access stuff in a hash, and you can randomly access stuff in an array. One of them you do by key, one of them you do by index. That's powerful because if the key in a hash, that often has like some semantic meaning. Like if I have a hash that has like name and age and address, and I look up their name, I didn't also have to find where that name was. Under the hood, and like you don't need to know this now, very few people do. Under the hood, the way that you access something in a hash, the reason it's called a hash, is that I can say, I'm looking for the name. Cool, the name scrambles into this value, and I know exactly where that is. If I had an array, totally different thing. Yeah. Yes, correct. It's called a hash. That's not like a magic math word or something. It's literally like as you're making hash browns, like as a diner, you do some stuff and you sort of flip them around, and then you bring more potatoes in and you flip those in, and like right away you can't tell which potato something came from because you just keep mixing it together. That's what's called hashing. Other questions about hashes and arrays? Yeah.
So for my definition, I said that arrays typically is preferable to have the same data types in them. Is that true?
That is true. That's actually part of the definition of an array. Like a mathematical array, is they all have the same data type. If they're, anybody know what it is when they're mixed data types? Clusterfuck. They're called tuples. T-U-P-L-E. JavaScript arrays don't care. Ruby arrays don't care. Mathematical definition of it, supposed to be the same data type. Yeah.
I'm surprised that your answer that you please give me about memory allocation. Is that something you never want to talk about in
You can, but I only gave all of us a minute. Yeah, hashes are less memory efficient, but everything doesn't need to be right next to each other either, which is kind of nice. So this is we're probably going to go down some rabbit holes. It's okay. Arrays, one of the reasons they have to be the same data type is they need to take up exactly the same amount of space. As in the computer, let's say I have a collection of 4 things. And this one is 0, 1, 1, 0. And the next one is 1, 1, 0, 0. And the next one is 1, 0, 0, 1. And the next one is 0, 0, 0, 0. So these are 4 elements of an array, like that. The array, I know where that is, and it's right here. If I want to find the other things in the array, if I want to find the third value, what do I do? Which index? The second index. But I said I wanted the third one. Why is it the second index? Can anybody figure out the reason why we have 0 indexed arrays based on this? If I know this is where the array starts, how many do I need to offset it to get the element that I want? 2. 0, I don't offset at all. 2 gives me the third one. The index is an offset from where the array starts. That only works if they're all the exact same size. Cool. Next one. Oh, sorry. Other questions about hashes and arrays? Yeah, Seth.
Just the difference between hashes and objects. Like
Mm.
an object is a hash, and I still sort of make up when you use when that's
And this is a really important one for you JavaScript folk, because think about, I said that JavaScript uses this word wrong. Ruby doesn't. What's the difference between a hash and an object? 1 minute, go. Cool, pencils down. There's my answer. Seth.
Okay, that makes sense, because, okay, that's why I've been getting confused. When I'm looking at an object doing JavaScript, it looks like what I learned the hash was.
Yes.
But then what is state behavior in the case of describing an actual object?
Sure.
What is the state behavior?
You can help Seth out with that. What is state and behavior in the case of an actual object? Right. Properties and methods, state and behavior. And since it's an instance of a class, we're also like talking about a noun, really. So we have a cat. Its state is it's a brown cat that is purring right now, and its age is 13. That's its state. Things that it can do, it can add an owner to itself. It can purr. It can attack another cat. Those are its behaviors. A hash is just some keys and some values. That's it. I had one other thing I want to say on that. Oh, and if you like, the cat shit is like too abstract. I showed you in Develop Denver, like my actual classes were things like user, event, ticket. Is the ticket redeemed or not? That's part of its state. Redeem is one of its methods. Changes that state from false to true. Jesse.
Because these values are sort of stable and they're sort of formulated,
Mhm.
I don't think we can use for that concept. Like objects, hashes, dictionaries, collections.
Sure. The difference between a hash and a dictionary depends on how it's implemented. Has to do with like memory allocation, some of those kinds of things. As a user, as a consumer of them, they're identical, just keys and values. Objects refer to something bigger, more conceptual, more powerful. Like for example, there's no prototype for a hash or a dictionary. I can't say, I would like a hash that looks like this, and this is a machine that makes those. And if I built all of that out, at some point it'd have something that looks a lot like classes and objects. So if I had a cat hash where name is Whiskers, age is 11, all this kind of shit. Awesome, I want another one just like that. Cool, well then you end up typing all those out, or you make a procedure that like makes those for you. It's called a factory. And you go, okay, cool, now I can reliably make these, but I don't have confidence that like, all right, except now I'm kenneling it right now, and kennel only accepts instances of the cat object because I need there to be a name and age, and if it can't, if it doesn't have a sleep method, my program's gonna explode as soon as I try to call sleep on the thing that you pass in. And so classes and objects are about confidence in the shape of this thing that you've defined. Hashes are just a way to organize related information. Yeah, Stacy.
So why can't you iterate over JavaScript objects?
Because Brendan Eich did not include that option in 1995 when he made it. And like more generally, it's because when you iterate over something, that sort of implies that there's a sequence to it. And like by definition, dictionaries and hashes don't have an order to them. So you can't rely on one being before another. And you can iterate through the keys of an object in JavaScript. How do we do that? Dot keys or for in, for of. We have plenty of ways to go through an object, but why we can't map, reduce, filter, select, why we can't do those things on the hashes in JavaScript is because those are things that are done to arrays. The better question is, why can you do them to objects in Ruby? And it's because it's really fucking convenient to do it that way. And so, Gerbil script, the way that you bridge that gap is use Lodash. Lodash has a map, and it has a filter, and it has all these things, and they also work on objects. Exactly the same way it does in Ruby. Good question. Other questions about the difference between a hash and an object? Hey, next one. And put 2 minutes down for this one. When would you use mapped, select, or filter? Reduce, find. 2 minutes on the clock. All 4 of them. Go. All right, pencils down. Compare your answer to mine. What questions do you have? Yeah.
Why say collection instead of array?
Great question. So, map, select, reduce, and find are like broad concepts. So, depending on the language, this could apply to arrays, hashes, lists, which are unordered arrays, tuples, lots of other stuff. Collection is the parent category for all of that. And in things like Lodash, things that are specifically for arrays are in the array category. Collection will apply to anything that is collection-like. Things that will also count as collections, strings. A string is an array of characters. Like you can imagine a string and you have all the little characters on it. But you can filter a string. You can count a string. You can do all these kinds of things. And so the abstract version of any kind of mishmash of different stuff is collection. We've got a different one for objects. There you go. What else?
Find the tree with first should be valued even if the other values match the condition as well, right?
If you wanted everything that matched,
So,
select or filter. Does anybody remember the Ruby goofy names for these that all rhyme?
detect, select,
Detect, select.
no,
This one's collect.
reject.
Inject.
Isn't there a reject?
Reject is the opposite of a
Okay.
select. I hate that. I fucking, those are so stupid. They irritate me endlessly. I will take it up with Mott's. There's a picture I saw once. There was a window that was signed by Mott's, Rasmus Lerdorf, and Brendan Eich. And it was like, God, the three most hated people in programming. Brendan Eich made JavaScript, Rasmus Lerdorf made PHP. It was like, that is a collection of very targeted people in one place. But as I heard somebody say the other day, there's two types of programming languages: the ones that everybody hates and the ones that nobody uses. That shit is the truth. All right. Other questions about map, select, reduce, find? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So is it all programming languages? So be on top of C. So basically next to
You might have to make them. You don't always get them for free. They're not always built into the language. But like if they didn't have a map function, the first thing you do is either bring in a library or write one yourself. Because then, think about, I write a for loop. I go for, like I'm gonna do some pseudo C here. I go for int I equals 0. I is greater than list.length, and then I increments, and then I'm trying to get every something out of a hash. So I've got hash, my hash equals some key. Let's see. Now I'm gonna do this differently. Let's say, Fim, I love you, but this is not helping. There we go. Okay, and the thing that I want is every sum key out of every thing in this array. I might have more than one. Oh no, C doesn't have a map function. So easy enough. What I do is I for loop over it, and I go array my sum keys. And I start with an empty array, and for each one of them, I go my array.length, my sum keys dot push, and then I push into it my array at index dot sum key. Cool, so that's how it would map over something in C. There are so many places I can fuck up in this logic. There's just tons. I can initialize something wrong, I can get the direction of this thing wrong, I can put the plus plus on the wrong side of the I can get the length of the wrong thing. That's so many different places something can go wrong. Versus in a modern language, saying map some key my array. There's really no place to screw up in that. And so the first thing that I would do if I didn't have that is I would write a function called map that does this. Other questions? Yeah. Capstoning.
I thought because you were on the Zoom call, you were just got that capstone.
She's fiending for that capstone.
Really resume I have it.
Other questions about map select reduce find? Cool. Next one. What is the difference between a class and an instance of a class? Even if you know this one, putting it into words might be harder than you think. 1 minute. Story of my life also. Cool, pencils down. Look at mine, look at yours. Questions? Nez. Class is also an object.
Everything in
It's not in every language. In Ruby, classes are also objects. Correct. Yeah. Because they don't have to have identical state and behavior. They should be, like your state should generally be of the same type, but even then, not every object needs to have every single possible property in it. So like, yes, correct. Or you might have a method that you don't implement in your concrete instance of something. But we still generally say that like they're more the same than they're not. Concrete, that's the word that you're looking for with that.
Why concrete?
Because the class is template, blueprint. It's the shape of something. It's not a thing itself. That's what the object is the concrete implementation of the abstract idea. A cat has ears, whiskers, and a tail. This is Fluffy, who has all of those things. Cool. Other questions about this? Seth?
I just wanted to know, like, I thought my definition was pretty close.
Okay.
But,
Hit me.
I would appreciate some, correction.
Yeah, let's do it.
Class is a complete description of a programming object with methods and states.
Mhm.
An instance of a class is an individual piece of content.
Yeah, I like that.
Does that work?
Mhm.
Seems like.
Cool. Anything else? Yeah, Finn.
I made it, what seems to be like, concrete.
Yes. Concrete. So like it's still letters on a screen, but if I say that every ticket is for an event and has a date, that's the class. Tickets to Nathaniel Rateliff on January 2nd at the Mission Ballroom, that's concrete. And if I say that Dawkin is playing at the Pepsi Center on June 2nd, follows the same template as the other one, is a different concrete implementation of something of that same shape. Cheers. What else? All right. Instance method and class method. You're very welcome. 1 minute. Cool. Compare. Good.
This does not reference what properties that you can operate on. I thought that was the difference, that in the instance method, it can operate only on properties that is in the class method, it operates on the entire class.
Also true. But that's because those class properties are owned by the class, not an instance of the class. Instance method belongs to the object, thus can operate on any object's properties. If I have a cat, whiskers I can't do whiskers of all and get every cat. I can get whiskers color. I can do cat.all, but I can't do cat.whiskers. Which cat am I talking about? And so those two things go together. Class is allowed to have properties, class is allowed to have methods. The object is allowed to have properties, the object is allowed to have methods. They can't see each other. Jesse.
Is it like missing when you use like parent child and the property of classes and objects?
Yes. Because that also exists, that's inheritance. Other questions? All right, next one. What is a gem? What is a gem file? And what is a gem file lock? Is a good one. I know. 1 minute. Cool, time's up. Compare and contrast. Why have a gem file and a gem file lock?
Because there are some things that are just like the exact version of the environment. There are some things that you don't want to just do the gem run haphazardly all over your program.
Mhm.
There have to be some specifics, otherwise it just crashes.
That's very true. Why didn't they just write that in the gem file to begin with?
Because,
Ben,
so,
go for it, Ben.
did I interrupt you?
No?
Okay, because you can modify the gem file, you can modify the gem file. Let me
That's
just
true.
see your information.
Who makes the gem file lock?
Is it the game creator or like
Ooh.
Ruby and JavaScript?
So glad I asked this question. What do you think, Amy?
Exactly.
Where's the gem file lock come from?
So gem file lock comes from after you bundle install your all the gems, because it's like you randomly add some for some
Mhm.
reason. Gem pri, the
Mhm.
gem file, you do the gem lock. Thus when you do your bundle install, it'll then make the gem lock file with all of the stuff that you installed, including that file.
Indeed, you run that command generates the lock file. Because the precise versions, you usually don't care. Like the default for a gem is, I don't know, whatever the latest version is, which is probably exactly what you want. Or you might say, I want any gem from any pri from version 3. Most recent version 3, I guess. And so you say that, but you have another gem that you're like, anything after 2 is fine. Ooh, but 2 worked with pri 3. 3 of that doesn't work with pri 3. And so what bundle is doing is it's working out this complex graph of what works with what and giving you precise versions of all of those and putting them in a lock file. Yes, exactly. Cool. So how come I have to save it in the file? Who cares about that? It was always going to have to do that when we were like installing stuff. Why am I putting it in the file and committing it in the repo and pushing it up and all that kind of stuff?
It's assumed those people are going to use your code.
Right. And the gem is not deterministic. It's a good vocab word. Deterministic is if I run it today and you run it today, we get the exact same results. NPM and gem don't do that on their own. They will do it if we have the same lock file. If we install the exact same lock file, we will get the exact same dependencies. But as recently as like a fucking year ago, that was not the case. Because what they would do is like to speed up your install times, you're like, you know what, you already have an acceptable version of gem installed already, we're just gonna roll with that. If the other person doesn't have that version of gem installed already, then they install, they run bundle install and get a different version of gem. And usually not a problem. Right up until it is. And you will spend a lot of time trying to chase that bug down. So we put in a lock file, everybody who has the same lock file gets the exact same versions of everything. Good one. Next, what is a one-to-many relationship and what is a many-to-many relationship? 1 minute. Go for it. I'm gonna add another minute. All right, pencils down. That's mine. What's yours look like? Questions?
Instead of saying empty, I had really similar, except I talked about database tables.
Sure.
Now, is that a correct thing, or was that not a correct thing?
It's helpful, and that's exactly how you will use it right now. This is bigger than that. Entities and relationships predate databases. So, and in fact, in information systems, you refer those to data stores rather than databases, because database is like a computer solution for this. A data store and like many-to-many relationships, these kinds of things, we can do this with papers and filing cabinets. We could do this with beads. We could do it with all kinds of other shit. But the concept stays the same. So that's why we use entities instead of tables. Great question. All right, how does a database relate to tables? I'm excited about this one. It's trickier than it sounds. 1 minute. Cool. That's my answer. I find that people really overcomplicate this foreign key idea. If I have many tickets, that's my ID. That's my name. A ticket also has an ID and an event. And this one is for school, and this one is for the train. All right, so I've got a independent table and a dependent table. User doesn't care about tickets. Tickets very much care about user, so this is dependent on this. So if I want to say that I own that ticket, no problem. I keep track of my primary key as a foreign key in this table. Primary because this uniquely identifies me. Foreign because somebody else's primary key, it's not mine. So I have all three of these tickets. And so my primary ID shows up as a foreign ID and everybody else's.
For example, another example, we have two users and both share the same
In like this specific model, like I'm just saying that like every ticket is owned by only one person. So like you've got that one. Okay. No, so that's not in this model.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Maybe not the greatest example. All foreign keys mean are I can't put 3 on here because 3 doesn't exist in this table. That's it. That's all it means. I can't put any number in this column that isn't a primary key in this table. Your database is dumb. It doesn't know anything. It is like such simple, low-level programming. All it does is look things up and really fast and store things really efficiently. That's it. And this is the most basic kind of check that we could make. If I add an ID that doesn't exist, it yells at me. That's foreign keys.
Because that's the two old three. So we took many
Exactly. So yeah, if I did this as user ticket, so I have a many-to-many that I'm saying, all right, for user 1, Kyle has a ticket to Beer Fest, and Ben also has a ticket to Beer Fest. But if I tried to do, and user 3 also has a ticket to Beer Fest, alarms go off. There's no user 3. Also, if I try to give Ben a second ticket there, alarms go off. This is keeping track of unique instances of these two things. If I try to give him a second ticket, not how it works. Also, if I try to give myself a ticket to an event that doesn't exist, alarms go off. There's no primary key in that table. That is all foreign keys are. But even that little bit of sanity check saves so many errors. Gives us a lot more confidence. And you could imagine a world where it's like, okay, this is part of the problem with primary keys. Let's say I get these flipped around. So right now this says that Kyle and Ben both have tickets to Beer Fest. What if I just put these in backwards? I just input them into the database wrong. And so now this says Kyle has a ticket to Beer Fest and a ticket to school. That doesn't throw an error. Those are both IDs that exist in those tables. It's still wrong. Foreign keys can't save you from everything. No, this is third double form. This is normalized. Yes. Right, because I put them in backwards. That query will execute. It maybe shouldn't. And so there are some databases that will try to save you from that by instead of having these like easy keys that increment, I randomly generate characters. And then this table becomes, all right, Kyle has a ticket to Beer Fest. Now, I can't put in any legal value there because these aren't just numbers anymore. These are complex values. So now I am saved from putting things in backwards. What's the problem with this? Nope, guess. How do I make sure I'm always getting a unique one of these? Now I could generate a duplicate value. Uh-oh. That's rough. Trade-offs. Trade-offs is everything. But for databases that do that, they use UUIDs. It's not actually QWER. It's something like this. And the way UUIDs work are there are just so goddamn many of them that it's just impossibly unlikely that you'd ever generate two in a row or two in the same lifetime. And so if I refresh, you can do this too. We could have every single person in the world doing this and not get the same values if we did this for 1,000 years, statistically. But it's statistically. That doesn't mean it couldn't happen.
Fun fact, it didn't happen to me once. I was just like, oh, thank God, you're saying I have to quit.
But that would be a different way of doing that. All right. Let's do the next one. Single source of truth. What does the single source of truth mean in terms of related objects? 1 minute. Go. Cool. Compare and contrast. Questions?
Again, that's more or less what I wrote, but can you give a concrete example?
Yeah.
Single source of truth?
What Ben and I were just talking about. You have users and tickets. What tickets do I have? And who has tickets to Beer Fest? Those are questions we ask from opposite ends of this. Rather than asking the user object, hey, who are your tickets? Or the ticket object, hey, which users have you? We have a third thing that keeps track of every unique instance of those two things. And those objects ask that thing.
And that's the whole reason we have that sort of many command that both throw one.
Exactly.
So it's just a joint thing.
Join tables.
Okay.
Join tables through classes, all of them are ways of implementing this idea. Cool. Other questions about that? All right. What is the purpose of the environment RB file? 1 minute. Cool. Questions? Pim.
I figured this out good enough, this is for the one for, the same two trees.
Yeah.
They have the two classes, they have a third place, book _author, picking up the best in that. And then, if you have, Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling.
Yes.
And then later on, this side, this doesn't work in this example, but this side has Harry Potter and this side has J.K. Rowling. You get in a single source of truth. Are those two entities connected once or twice?
Their relationship only exists in that table, in the through class. Doesn't exist anywhere else. If you get rid of any record in there, those two entities on their own don't know anything about each other. So like in book and book author, you go, so J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter, and psych, so did Stephen King. There would be another record in that class. The Stephen King object doesn't know about Harry Potter. The J.K. Rowling object doesn't know about Harry Potter. Harry Potter doesn't know about J.K. Rowling or Stephen King. The only record of those instances are in the through class. Questions about environments? Easy. Onward. Fuck ton of people got this wrong last time we asked. So, what does no RM do? 1 minute. It's a complicated one. Time's up. Believe it or not, this is the most complicated question that's been on here so far. Anybody tell me about object relationships versus relational data? Can anybody tell me the difference between object relationships and relational relationships? I say, this is probably easier to explain in terms of JavaScript. Or hashes. Yeah, let's just say hashes in general. So I have a user. They have an ID and a name. And they own tickets. Straightforward enough, right? But tickets are also kind of like independent of user. I might just want to get a list of all the tickets. Well, the way that I would do that is by going through all of the users and then just taking out their tickets and then combining them and getting rid of duplicates. That's gross. So we store that way differently in the database. In the database, we have a user, we have tickets, we have user tickets, we have a record over here for Kyle. We have a record over here for Beer Fest. And then we have a different color here. I have this table that records every coincidence of those two records. Now I can get the users, I can get the tickets, and I can like write join statements and stuff to get all of my tickets. If I queried that, I'd probably do something like select name and event from user inner join what was it, ticket? Yeah. Inner join ticket on oh, actually I need to go through that table. So it'd be inner join user ticket on user ID equals user ticket user ID, and then I do almost the exact same thing from the other side. Inner join event on event ID equals user event dot event ID and then the thing that I would get back from that would look like this. Kyle Beer Fest Kyle train. Flat. I stored it flat. I can query it flat. But what the fuck? That's not how I want to use it. The way that I want to use it is I want these keys and values and I want to show what I own as an array. I want to show this kind of ownership sort of thing. So some way or another, I have to get from the relational model that looks like that to the object model that looks like that. So I map between them with an object relational mapper. I can insert something like this into the ORM and it figures out how to get everything to the right table. I can ask for me and all my tickets and it does all the jamming together to loop through something that looks like this and make sure that all of this just gets thrown into an array that's owned by one Kyle. It's a hard problem. And that becomes really obvious if you've ever tried to do one of these by hand. I have several times. I hate it. There's a name for this problem. It's the biggest word we'll use today. Object relational impedance mismatch. We store the data one way, we use it a different way. They're not directly compatible. The purpose of an ORM is to help translate between them. Active record is the best one of these I've ever seen. You poke around on the internet, nobody likes ORMs. They suck. They're terrible to work with. The only thing worse than using an ORM is not using an ORM. Because the chances that you'll come up with a better way to do it are less than zero. Yeah, Ben.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I looked it up and the definition doesn't get to what else. So can you give me whatever you do and
Sure. Impedance is an electricity term. What does it mean in electricity?
the effective resistance of an electric circuit or component to alternating current arising from the combined effects of ohmic voltage resistance and reactance.
So if I have something that is outputting 12 ohms into something that's expecting 1,000 ohms, they're probably not going to play too well together. And this is a super common problem in electronics. I either got to step the resistance of this up, or I got to step the resistance of this down. But the impedance hasn't matched. So I need something in between to match them. That's what an ORM is.
It's just because the data is organized in a way that you don't want that you can't do anything else.
We're storing it and using it in different ways. Now, you might ask very legitimately, well, what if we stored it the same way that we used it? There's actually a very popular option for that. Anybody know what it is? We don't teach it here, but every other boot camp does. Yep. NoSQL. Mongo. Cassandra. Mongo just takes like JavaScript objects, throws them in as is. There's no concept of relationship in Mongo. You have collections.
What's that so popular?
Okay, so the answer that was given at the time was non-relational databases on web scale. Our data models just change so quickly, we can't be bothered with schemas and relationships. You just gotta store it like you're gonna use it, and you get it out, and it's so much faster. The real reason that they got really popular is that databases are hard, and like engineers think that they know everything about everything, and databases make them feel stupid. And it's like, I knew the problem wasn't me. The problem was that databases just suck. So this is more like how I would think about it. And it turns out that like there's a billion problems with non-relational databases. Since they don't enforce schemas, it's really easy for your data to corrupt. If you have things that take multiple steps to do and it fails halfway through that, you can't roll back the previous steps that you did, which is real rough on, say, banking transactions. And like they're fundamentally just unreliable, which is not a big deal for user configuration, for posts and comments, for some of these kinds of things. you would probably be pretty irritated if your bank failed as often as every Mongo database does. So like I like the phrase, NoSQL databases are for when it absolutely, positively doesn't have to work. But no ORMs, and we store the data exactly the way that we use it. They also repeat themselves a lot since they don't have relationships. If I'm storing my tickets in here, Ben also has Beerfest stored in his. That way too. There's no single source of truth for what Beerfest is. And so if I change the name of Beerfest to Alcohol Fest, I have to change it in every single one of those records.
This reminds me, for my Capstone, I couldn't get my PHP backend working, so I made a really quick Rails, and then just had a JSON object instead of a relational database. And which I thought was so witty, and then further along the goal, I was like, fuck. So everything Kyle said is very true. Use a JSON object data type.
So that's actually interesting because those JSON, that data type was added to kill Mongo. Postgres was like, cool, here's Mongo as a data type in Postgres. Just if that's what you really think you want, now you have it.
So much more work.
It's funny, that entire process that you went through in like a couple days was a year of the industry's life. Is everyone's like, that's a good idea, we should all do that. And then like by September, it was like, no! Who tricked us into thinking this was a good idea? All right, cool. This is maybe my favorite question on this list. What is an API? Let's do 2 minutes on this one. All right. This is the one where I'm expecting like the biggest delta between what I wrote and what you wrote. So let's get the question started.
You called it a framework for a back end that includes database relationships, but that doesn't seem to really.
So my
That's
guess
why I've been using it, but
is that all of you probably had something that was kind of like that. And that's almost exclusively how we've used that word, that phrase in this program. It's way bigger than that. So web services, that's how we've been using API. We talk about the Pokemon API. We're talking about the Pokemon web service. An API could be something like this. We would say that the API of this function is that it takes in two integers and returns their sum as an integer. That's the API of this function. Given this input, I'll give you this output. It's a contract. We could do that same function with a different API. Same function, does the same thing, way different API. This only sums two numbers. This one sums an arbitrary number of numbers and returns their total. Different API because the inputs for it are different. It's a different contract. If you give this a third number, it doesn't get included, wasn't part of the contract. API for this one, I said I'll take any number of numbers. That's the contract. Or, this is how we link it to what you know. If you give me an HTTP GET request to /bagels, I will give you a list of stored bagels. You give me this input, I'll give you that output. If you give me an HTTP put request to bagels and some ID, as well as providing me an updated bagel, I'll update the bagel in the database, that's a state change, and give you the updated record. That's the contract. When we're doing it with HTTP, it's a web service. Everybody in this industry refers to that as an API, but an API is a bigger idea. The API is the contract with inputs and outputs. What it doesn't refer to is how that's done. So, a common way this is diagrammed, this is a function. Exactly. If I give you these arguments, you give me that return value. The API is this part, not what happens in between. If this is the Pokemon web service, if you give me this request, I'll give you this response. The API is this and this. I have no clue how they do this. It could be a Postgres database. It could be a Mongo database. For all I know, somebody writes it down on a piece of paper and stores it in a file cabinet and pulls it out and just types really fast. I have no clue, and I don't need to. All I need to know is what the contract is. Everything else we refer to as the black box. It's a black box because we can't see inside of it. Don't need to. All I need to know is the API. Same thing with Lodash. When I look at these Lodash functions, difference. So creates an array of array values not included in the other arrays using this thing for equality comparisons. So I say I have 0, 1, 2, 3, and I give it an array with 1 and 2 in it. I should get back 0 and 3. That's the API. Did they do that with while loops, for loops, reduce? I don't know. I don't care. All I care about is the API. Creates a slice of an array with this many elements dropped from the beginning. Don't know how it does it. All I know is if I call it and I give it the shit that it told me to give it, that's what happens. That's the API for drop. More questions about APIs? No, you would say the API of .map is that it takes in a function. The function has to have the signature of any individual item it's operating on, the index, and the original array, and its body must return the transformation that happens on that element. That's the API of map. The API of fetch. As its first argument, it takes in a string. That's a URL to make an HTTP request to. Its second argument is an optional options object that can have these values in it. And it's going to return a promise that when resolved gives you the HTTP response. That's the API of fetch. Other questions about APIs? All right, let's do one more. What is semantic HTML? 1 minute. It's time. So what does non-semantic HTML look like? Divs, divs on divs on divs. Yo dog, would you like divs? So I might write something semantically that it looks like that. That's the semantic way to write HTML. Non-semantic way to write HTML always ends up looking something like this. There's like very few things that piss me off more than something like that. So you gotta be kidding me. Gave it a class of secondary heading. We literally have something that means that. That's the non-semantic way to write that same thing. M means emphasis. Means that this has some level of emphasis. It is generally represented by italics. Once upon a time, we used to do that by wrapping something in I tags to indicate that there's just a look italic. A lot of different ways to emphasize something, though. We could make it italic. We could thicken the weight of the font. We could make it a different color. In a different culture, italics might not be what's used to create emphasis. Semantically marking it up rather than one way that it could look. The best way that I've seen semantics described is if you do your semantics right, you should be able to delete the style sheets and then rewrite them and completely change the look of your app without touching your HTML. The content hierarchy is the same. Why would you need to rewrite the HTML? And I got to experience that. The Develop Denver site was like that. Last year's didn't look anything like this year's. Deleted the style sheets, made new ones. I also didn't have to worry about what functionality I might have broken, what event listeners got detached when I move HTML elements around. None of that stuff was a concern. Just change style sheets. It's cool. Yeah.
I mean, see a lot more on the website writing in those semantic way.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the reason that people write in non-semantic ways is because engineers think they know everything. And there aren't such easy right answers with semantic HTML. There's guides. Look at NDN HTML element reference. So this is definitions of all the elements. And I go, okay, well, what's a section? Standalone section which doesn't have a more semantic element to represent it. Typically, but not always, they have a heading. Navigation menu should be wrapped in a nav element, but a list of search results and a map display and its controls don't have specific elements and could be put inside of a section. If it's a standalone piece, an article is probably a better representation. So you can imagine some Square engineering type seeing all that ambiguity. I mean, HTML just, it doesn't make any sense, is the thing. And really, you're just wrapping stuff. Okay, so I wrap a thing inside of a thing. The reason why it's not an official part of the curriculum at Flatiron is because the people who wrote this curriculum think so little of HTML. They're just figure it out. People can learn that in 10 minutes. I was you can learn to write HTML that passes validation in 10 minutes. That was never the problem. Picking the correct element for the correct circumstance, that's much more difficult. But engineers don't respect it. So you see a lot of garbage. And the most fucked up part of that is that they hurt themselves with that. If you imagine, instead of walking into a giant app with semantic markup like this, you have to figure out what all of this div soup means. Onboarding for that is a nightmare. And you try to write style sheets for something like this? Get out of here. It's why engineers are also so mystified by CSS all the time, because they have these arbitrary divs that are just divs on divs on divs on divs. And it's impossible to write good style sheets when you do that. And so they go, CSS is for design. I'm just not artistic, is kind of the thing. I'm really not more a looks. I don't do the visuals. I'm more of how something works. This is how it works, motherfucker. Like, this is what it means. If you don't get that right, why would anybody trust you to write like functionality around that? If you don't even know what something is. Ugh. This is a bugbear of mine. So, but yeah, most people write very, very, very bad HTML because they never learned how to write good HTML because they think they didn't have to, because that's not elite enough.
This is the same as you keep telling us to write our code so that it tells the story.
Yes, yes.
You would look at the HTML and see the web page, basically the same thing.
Exactly. I should be able to look at your HTML and understand the hierarchy of what I'm looking at. I might not get an idea of what it looks like, but that shouldn't matter. Even like rearranging things with Flexbox, check this shit out. I don't know if you picked up on this. This is the coolest thing in Flexbox. You can reorder stuff. You can put it in a completely different order than you wrote it in. Just give it a different order property, and if it's a flex child, you can totally just move stuff around. If, for whatever reason, it visually should not be in the order that it semantically exists in. Beautiful. Cool. I'm going to send out survey. Let's do some feelings. Thank you. That was fun.